Hi, this is Brendan Baines at Lipscomb University, here to talk with you about interpreting the graphs of functions. Interpreting the graph of functions is something that I have my students do in a regular classroom setting. It engages them in making sense of the graphs that we produce, and that's always helpful because sometimes the graphs we produce do not have any scenario with them. So the interpretation gets a little lost if we haven't defined a setting for them. So asking students essentially to make their own settings and then to tell a story about a graph is what I'll ask them to do, and it's what I'll be asking you to do. So you're basically going to learn how to interpret the graphs of functions in this app. So good questions to ask when we see a graph are things like, when the x variable is a particular value, what's the y value? Or when y is a particular value, what is x's value? We might be interested in the highest y value or the lowest y value. Those are also called the maximum and minimum y values. We might also be interested in what's happening to the y value over time. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Does it go up and down? Here's an example. This graph shows the amount of potato chips given in ounces on the y-axis and the time elapsed in minutes on the x-axis. So what can we say? We look at the ordered pair 0, 32, 0, 32, and we can say that the bowl was originally filled to 32 ounces. We might also look at the ordered pair 14, 0, and we could say that after 14 minutes, there were no more ounces of potato chips in the bowl. The bowl was empty. We could even attach more scenario to this. This sort of reminds me of at a church function when we have potato chips and you start the line and people start coming through and they really start to attack the chips there. And then somebody will see that the chips are getting low and they would fill them up. And then maybe people start trickling in at more of a steady rate towards the end and until they're empty and nobody refills the bowl. We noticed that at 6 minutes in that the bowl goes back up to 32 ounces, so that would indicate someone maybe refilled the bowl, as I said earlier. So a good habit that we want to get into is when we see a graph, we want to ask some of these questions. We want to see if we can tell the story of the graph. So here's my my stab at doing this. Your story, if you wrote a story for this graph, might contain some other observations. I've just selected some of the ones that stood out to me. So the bowl originally contained 32 ounces of potato chips. Someone grabbed a 3-ounce handful of chips, leaving 29 ounces in the bowl. The chips then were not touched between time 1 and time 2. And then chips were eaten more and more. Again, if we're thinking this is a party or some kind of function, maybe more and more people are showing up at this point. At 6 minutes, the bowl was filled back to its original capacity of 32 ounces. And then from there on, the chips were eaten at 4 ounces of chips per minute until the bowl was empty. I will note, I know that this is 4 ounces of chips per minute because on the original PowerPoint, I could hover over these points and it would show the ordered pairs. Maybe a little harder for you to know that that's 4 ounces of chips per minute because when you're watching this video here, you will not see the ordered pairs anymore. So another example, this graph shows the time elapsed on the x-axis and the temperature of a 200-gram batch of coffee being roasted on the y-axis. And so we might try to tell this coffee roasting story. When we look at the graph, we can see that at 300 degrees, that was the original temperature when the roast began. I'll go back and we can look at that at 300 degrees. That's when we put the coffee in. The temperature reading decreases within the first minute of roasting, and we can see that here. It begins to decrease. Okay, it bottoms out and then it increases throughout until the end of the roast. If we look at the increases, we'll see that they're getting smaller as the roast progresses. And so you can see that sort of it as a kind of a quick climb there, and then less of a climb, and less, and then even less so there towards at the end. So that's indicating that even though the temperature is increasing, it's not increasing as quickly towards the end of the roast. We can finally see that at 395 degrees, after 11 and a half minutes had elapsed, that the coffee was ejected from the roaster. And again, if the original PowerPoint, you would be able to hover over this and see that ordered pair. I'll leave you with a question for you to evaluate. What is the story of this graph? There are no X and Y variable definitions here, so you'll have to come up with those on your own. And again, you'll have to tell the story about what's happening here.